Do I ever come across as negative, as an angry atheist, as some bitter, God hating, religious hating, Christian hating person? Well, today I want to do something a little more positive, something that I consider to be fairly uplifting. I guess you can say I'm still in the holiday spirit. What I'm going to do today is that previously I did a video responding to Rhett McLaughlin's video where he was talking about how people say to him, why can't you just shut up about Jesus? Why can't you just stop talking about Jesus? We get it. You're an atheist. You don't believe anymore. Move on. And I'm not going to rehash that whole video for you. You guys can look that up. I should put a image of it here or something so that you guys know what to look for. You guys can check that out if you haven't seen that video yet. But the comments on that I found to be, quite frankly, kind of uplifting, because there were a lot of you who replied in a way to essentially back up why atheism and atheist YouTube, it's needed sometimes as a counterweight. It's needed for those others who are deconstructing and feel alone. It's needed for those sometimes who just feel like, am I the only sane person in the room? And I thought that a lot of your comments were pretty cool and kind of touching. So I thought it would be cool to go through those today. No negative comments. We're not trying to trash anyone. I'm not trying to highlight all the stupid things that people have put on my videos, as I do in other episodes like this. And to be clear, I get a lot of great comments, especially from fellow atheists / agnostics on nearly all of my videos. But I think this video seemed to hit a nerve for some people. So I really thought it would be cool to highlight these comments. So the first comment I want to look at is from Neil Bradley, who said, "Whenever Christians tell me to shut up about their religion, especially when I detect some genuine aggression, I like to remind them that in times past, they could have reported me and got me burned at the stake for blasphemy. Then I ask them if they hanker for those good old days. That tends to silence them." This is a great point, because the audacity of people today, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, who want to whine and bitch about the fact that there are outlets like YouTube where atheists are free to post their videos saying anything that they want about Christianity. And for not most Christians, but for a small subset of especially butthurt Christians, this really rubs them the wrong way. But nobody seems to care or acknowledge that for most of human history, to have gone against religious dogma was not just something you could have done to have been cool or avant-garde or to make a few bucks and add money. No, it was something that would get you killed, or at least horribly ostracized and removed from the community. That was probably the best that you could hope for. So, no, I don't feel sorry that you are affronted by a few videos you happen to see in your feed that don't back up your Christian beliefs. You can deal with it, I'm sure. And the fact is that the more atheist videos you're seeing, it's an indication of the more atheist videos that you're watching, because YouTube's algorithm is pretty aggressive in trying to remove anything that you're not interested in and forwarding you anything that you are interested in. So if you only click on Christian videos and never click on atheist videos, the atheist videos will disappear out of your feed pretty damn quickly. Now, I understand some videos might be a little clickbaity. Maybe you thought you were clicking on a Christian video and you somehow got stuck on an atheist video, but you can put a downvote and get off the video right away, and the algorithm will still figure that out. Platt Begarn says, "I ask the same question to all non-deconstructing Christians." The question being, why can't you just shut up about Jesus? That's hilarious to me because, usually the people that are most vocal about saying to you, why can't you just stop talking about Jesus if you're an atheist? They're the ones that really love to talk about Jesus all the time. So I generally find that for Christians who are of an even mindset and they have good mental health, they normally couldn't care less whether atheists are out publishing videos or talking to their friends about atheism or whatever. It doesn't bother them because they're secure in their faith. Silent Souls says, if I get confronted with my ex by other people, yes, I will talk about it. It is more like having an ex that lives next door with 10 of your kids who does everything to let me know she's still there. So the question is not even equivalent. But yes, that is one thing the religious are good at, making false equivalents. It is one way how they lie/deceive. So part of Rhett's example of why he still talks about Jesus, even though he doesn't believe in Christianity anymore, is that we are replete with Christianity, at least here in America. And as Silent Souls is bringing up, it's bad enough if your ex is someone that everyone talks about. That's something that Rhett talked about in the original video. But then if your ex lives right next door and, they have a whole Christian commune and, it's just this idea that Christianity is everywhere. It's all around. And that's okay. I can't stop that. And I'm not trying to burn down Christianity, even if I could. But the fact that anyone would sit there and get butthurt that you want to talk about your atheism is very rich indeed. So here's a very thoughtful comment from Kib or KIB. It says, a person who has renounced a deeply held theistic faith often has a distinct, deeply considered, and sometimes more vocal form of atheism compared to someone who never believed. First of all, I have to point out that, I get multiple people replying on my videos, of course. I do get comments from people who say, hey, I've never been an atheist. Some of them are honestly kind of confused by some of my commentary because they're living kind of in this different world where they didn't have to escape Christianity. And while I have a certain envy of that kind of person, Kib or KIB here is pointing out that if you are that person who has deconstructed or escaped Christianity, so to speak, it's definitely a very unique perspective. And those people typically are, as they say, deeply considered. And sometimes they have a more vocal form of atheism. I don't think that makes my views on atheism more correct, but it does possibly make them more impassioned. It also means that while I don't know everything about Christianity, I, like a lot of deconstructed people, am in a somewhat unique position to comment on Christianity because I've been through it. I've been a believer. I've tried multiple ways. I tried to convince myself that I should still be a believer. I tried to do all the things. I tried to be the Christian. And ultimately, finally, I had to say this isn't working. But I don't know many people who have always been atheists, for example, who've read the Bible multiple times. I'm sure that they exist. But I think that a lot of the people who have read the Bible multiple times are either Christians or they're deconstructed Christians. So there are aspects of Christianity that I'm not saying that it gives me special knowledge. I'm not saying that I'm better in my understanding than someone who is always an atheist or someone who's a Christian, but it definitely gives me, as Kib says, a distinct perspective. And I think that perspective can be valuable to people, whether they are atheists now or agnostics or deconstructing, or even if they're Christians. So another comment here from Silent Souls is that another huge reason is that religion is at war with reality. Always has been, always will be. It's all about lies and deception, and it is the rot in humanity. Now, I'll be frank with you. I don't usually have a feeling or a position that is as strong as Silent Souls, but I appreciate it. And there is a key piece here about this person's response that I want to highlight. And it's this idea that they are at war with reality. Now, I know that feels like a very strong statement, right? It probably feels over the top and outright combative to a lot of Christians. But you can't give me this book that is chock full of massively unverifiable, over the top claims, miracle claims, and then tell me that your religion is not at war with reality. Because you're not just telling these stories, you are actually imposing upon your own faith or your own congregants that it is a measure of their loyalty to take all of these claims at face value and to not question any of them. Now, I know different denominations and different types of Christians have different ideas about how literally that they have to take the Bible. So if you are not a literalist, then kudos to you. But even if you're not a literalist, there are people that have very liberal views of the Bible, and yet they still believe deeply that Jesus came to earth in bodily form and was resurrected in bodily form, not in spirit, but his body was actually resurrected and he walked the earth again. That alone is a claim that is so fantastical that it would require massive evidence to accept on any sort of empirical level. And yet, if you doubt it, you are considered by many in the Christian faith to be an apostate. So, while I do understand that there are Christians who recognize science, there are Christians who recognize that the earth is not 6,000 years old or whatever, and they recognize that evolution happened, it's a thing. They're still at all times kind of grappling with reality. You cannot center your faith around this entire idea of a resurrected God King without, on some level, being at war with reality. So Michael Vess says, I'm okay with disrespecting religion, especially the Abrahamic ones, because they disrespect humanity. Now, just like the previous comment, I will say that the extent to which I agree on this statement is maybe a function of whatever given day I'm reading it. I always agree with it to some extent because the Abrahamic religions have, at a minimum, baked into their holy text a deep disrespect for humanity. Now, of course, a lot of Christians will try to talk that away. A lot of Christians literally won't even pay attention to it or will try to claim that it's not there. A lot of Christians will take the viewpoint that, well, I'm a red letter Christian. Like, I just follow the things that Jesus said and, you know, the spirit of Jesus, who Jesus was and what he represented, which is a way to try to soothe that over, okay? But the fact remains that even Jesus said some things that were pretty damn problematic from humanity's perspective. And if you can't recognize that, then I don't know if I can have much respect for your reasoning capabilities. So the idea of disrespecting religion does often come down to the fact that religion itself, especially the Abrahamic ones, disrespect humanity. But there is another aspect of his comment that I want to highlight. Part of the reason that I do this channel is that when I was growing up, there was this kind of intrinsic idea that was spoken out loud a few times, but it was also sort of baked into the culture in which I was raised. And the idea was this, that you couldn't disrespect someone's religious beliefs. That you may not agree with their religious beliefs, you may think that they're wrong or misguided or whatever, but you don't disrespect anyone's religious beliefs. That was always considered to be somehow out of bounds. And I've gotten to a point in my life where I don't want to attack everyone's religion, but I absolutely think that there are many religious beliefs that have no qualification for respect whatsoever. And it is problematic at best sometimes to just say, well, we have to respect everyone's beliefs. Like, at what level then do you draw any line when someone slaps the term religious on it? I know for a lot of Christians, they think the line is Christianity. They think that everything inside of Christianity should be respected, even if you don't agree with it. And everything outside of Christianity, they can feel free to denigrate and make fun of. But of course, even within religion, there are people to this day that will tell you that God was absolutely justified in commanding the genocide of the Canaanites. And even if you want to tell me that it's just a story, it never happened, which very well might be the case, even if you just want to tell me that it's just some kind of allegory, well, it's still an allegory about your omnipotent God commanding genocide, which is disgusting. And if you want to tell me that I should respect that, no, I absolutely will not. Even if we get out of the moralistic issues, like if we talk about the story of Balaam and his donkey, it's stupid. It's a stupid story. The logistics of it are stupid. The morals of it are stupid. Everything about it reads like a bad children's fairy tale, one in which the authors didn't even think things through very well. And if you want me to respect that story, no, it's a stupid story. Even if you told me that you are a devout Christian and you're going to believe in Christianity till the day you die, and that's fine. But if you think that the story of Balaam and his donkey isn't stupid, it's because you will just make excuses for anything that has a Christian label slapped onto it. Because I guarantee you, if that story had Allah slapped into it and you didn't like the religion behind it, you also would say that it's a fucking stupid story. She's Love and Music says, I love Christians, but they say some of the most crazy delulu stuff. I used to be Christian and used to say crazy delulu stuff too. Now, since I'm on the outside looking in, I realized how crazy and delulu I was and feel ashamed of it. This hits me kind of hard because I think that a lot of people who have deconstructed have this sense. It's not just that they don't believe in it anymore, but then they, on some level, feel like they have to confront the fact that they believed and they followed these stories and they towed this company line and they parroted these ideas, which some of which feel like they're just silly or delulu. And I would encourage She's Love and Music to be kind to herself in that regard, because there are a lot of embarrassing thoughts to hold. There are a lot of stupid thoughts that we can hold. I have done videos in the past where I explained in detail my position that you can have a stupid thought without being a stupid person. Those are two different things. Sometimes we assume that stupid thought means stupid person. That's not the same thing. So you can have crazy delulu thoughts, and that doesn't mean that you yourself were necessarily that bad. Also, I think you just have to work at it from the perspective that you've escaped the cult. And I know that calling Christianity a cult is a whole other can of worms. I'm going to address that in another video. But I'm just saying for now, know that you've escaped. So don't beat yourself up over that too much, because it's important to give yourself credit where credit is due and realize that, okay, yes, you said some delulu stuff, but how many people have the moral fortitude and the intellectual honesty to admit to themselves and to others that, yeah, that stuff I said last year or last decade or whatever, that was some crazy shit, and I'm trying to do better. So give yourself some grace. I definitely think that you deserve it, because everyone who's been through that process at some time has said some delulu stuff. Rico Stefan says, what if you realize that this relationship to Jesus has been an abusive relationship and you hear the words of the abuser everywhere? Right. That's how I think. It's a further abuse on and on and on. Not that I was abused by a priest. I didn't trust them anyway. My aunt was a Protestant priest, and I could tell you stories that show that when God doesn't drown the world again, he isn't real. I wanted to highlight this comment because when you have people like me or others on YouTube or the internet who have deconstructed, there is this general assumption, especially from some snarky Christians, that, oh, we're just pissed off because we felt abused, like we were literally abused as children by a priest or something, or our parents or an elder, or we felt physically or emotionally or spiritually abused in some other way. And there are certainly people who deconstruct who did unfortunately suffer abuse, like literal abuse in their Christian days. But even if you didn't particularly suffer any kind of abuse, you can still feel that the entire organization is abusive in nature. So I never was abused by anyone in the church or in my family. I was never, touched by a priest. There was never some, unspeakable, horrible, untoward thing that happened to me when I was a kid or a teenager or anything in the church. Thank goodness. So thankfully, I don't have those types of experiences to relate, although there are those people who have those experiences and they need to be respected for the pain that they're dealing with. But it isn't a matter of just, was I abused? Because the system itself is oppressive. And I think it's fair, even for someone like myself, who wasn't specifically abused in any way, to feel that the ideas and the processes that I experienced as a part of religion were an oppressive influence on my life. And now that I'm free of it, I feel truly free. It's absolutely liberating. So thank God for that. So I think it's important that we always give space to anyone who truly has an abuse type story, while also recognizing that even if you weren't specifically abused, you may feel like you were in a type of abusive relationship when you were in the church. I'm going to screw this up. It looks like Yves Grain Dorge. I don't know. It says, I think that for some of the people that have become non-believers later in life, particularly the ones that have invested a lot in their faith, that there is this feeling of having been taken for a ride all these years, and they have the need to let everybody know that it is not working anymore. This is kind of similar to previous comments, but it still takes a bit of a different angle in saying, hey, if you feel like for whatever reason you've escaped and thank God you're gone, of course, that leads to some extent to this desire to want to tell others. Now, before I had this YouTube channel, I never went out and tried to tell people about my atheism. I didn't even try to have religious conversations with anyone whatsoever. I didn't have them with strangers. I didn't have them with family. I think there was like one friend I have who sometimes we would talk about religion because it was of particular interest to him. But for the most part, I was that type of atheist who felt very happy just letting everyone else deal with the religious crap hereafter. Obviously, I've grown a little differently now that I have this channel. This channel to me is that outlet, like what Yves is talking about. The outlet is that to some extent you can have this feeling like you've been taken for a ride and you have the need to let everybody know. And if you don't want to hear that, if you think that these types of statements are banal or boring or stupid, then don't watch the damn videos. But there are people who want to hear what I'm saying on this. It's not 1 million people. It's not 100,000 people, but there are people watching the videos. So clearly there's some kind of audience. And I don't feel a need to warn the world off of religion. I'm not trying to save the world or deconvert the world. But to some extent, I do agree with the idea that I have the need to let everybody know that it's not working anymore, because some of the thought processes that I've gone through to get to this point have taken me decades to get to. And they might take you decades as well. But if I can help you on some of these things, if I can kind of show you some of the same conclusions that I've worked through over years or decades, maybe you can get to that point sooner and then do whatever you want going forward. So Gaggle57 says, you sure spend a lot of time talking about God. Should be answered, I'm not talking about God because I don't think such a thing exists. I'm talking about the belief in God or gods and all that entails. Do you understand the distinction? And this comes up over and over again, like Rhett was bringing up in his video, where people are saying to him, we get it, can't you stop talking about Jesus? Or people try to throw it back in your face, like, wow, you talk about God a lot. You really must believe in God. No, that has nothing to do with believing in God. We still live in a society that is drenched with all of your God crap. It affects our daily lives over and over and over again. So talking about God has no correlation to how much you believe in God. There are some people who believe deeply in God and speak very little about God. And there are some people who don't believe at all in God and yet spend a lot of their time talking about God because, at least for me personally, when I'm doing this channel, I think that it is pertinent to society today. So these videos are gratifying to me, quite frankly, even if no one else gives a shit. Now, I've said this before, and I'll mention it again. If you were to run into me in New Orleans one day, like at a bar or a festival or a jazz club or something, you're not going to find me randomly looking for strangers to talk about atheism or Christianity or to try to confront their religious beliefs. Nothing could bore me more, and nothing sounds less fruitful to me. I don't walk around all day talking about religion and atheism and all this stuff. In fact, I only do it when I'm doing these videos, and these videos have started to become a big part of my, weekly time allotment aside from my regular day job. But still, when I'm not doing these videos, I'm not talking about this shit. Who wants to sit around and talk about this shit all day long? That sounds horrible to me. I love Be Ever Curious's comment here. It's simple and to the point. And their comment is, does there have to be a point? So the inference here is, what's the point of you continually talking about Jesus or God or whatever? But a very rational response to this is, does there have to be a point? I mean, on its most banal level, these are YouTube videos that I'm doing, that Rhett McLaughlin's doing. I'm not putting myself on that equivalence, but, these are just YouTube videos. They're not broadcast into your head. You can watch them. You can not watch them. Some people watch these videos purely because they find them to be entertainment on some level. I know there are Christians who watch my videos who aren't swayed in the least by my points, and yet they watch my videos. Of course, I know that there are atheists and agnostics who watch my videos, some of whom already know they're going to agree with everything that I say before they ever hit play, and yet they watch the videos. And of course, there are some people who are in between. One simple way to look at this is, who cares where you are in that spectrum? If you want to watch the video, watch it. And if you don't. Even if we're in real life, even though I just said I don't walk around talking about Jesus or God or anything like that. I mean, ultimately, if I want to talk about God, do I need to have a point? Do I need to have, if you don't want to talk to me about God, you can walk away or you can tell me to shut up. But some people walk around all day and talk about, the NFL games that were played last weekend. And for them, that is a major part of their life. And if you are one of those kinds of people, you might gravitate towards them and you might share that fandom with them. And if you're not, you might gravitate away from them. But if you ask someone, what's the point of following the NFL? I would argue that you yourself are kind of missing the point. There's not really a point to following the NFL. You either like NFL football or you don't. And neither one is a right or wrong position. So while I will say that religion obviously has some deep issues in society. And some of the things that we talk about here on this channel theoretically have a deep impact on your life and my life, etc. It doesn't have to mean any of that to watch the video. Maybe you just want to watch the video, and that's okay. There doesn't always have to be a point. Edward Van says, followers of Jesus walked away from him and he did nothing, or more preciously, could do nothing to stop them. This is what free will looks like, a human capability God is powerless against. Christians love to talk about free will because they need free will. They want, the Calvinists are an interesting side note on that. I keep saying I have to do some videos on Calvinism, but I think that free will is important to a lot of the ideas of Christianity because they want to believe that you have this choice and you're going to be rewarded for the right choice. You're going to be punished for the wrong choice. And therefore, they want to believe in free will. But of course, as long as you have free will, that means, of course, some people can and will walk away. So why, if you are a Christian, would you even be saying to someone, can't you just stop talking about Jesus? We all have that free will, according to most Christians, right? So you can't have it both ways. You can't say we have free will and then be pissed off because some people use that free will to talk against your beliefs of God or religion. You can't have it both ways. Wordscapes says, I have loads of time for polytheists, Sikhs, Buddhists, but people of the Abrahamic faiths call the police. And yeah, I get that. I really do. I've had to think about this a little bit since I've started this channel, and I've had a number of people accuse me of being an anti-theist. And I had to think deeply about that because for a while I'm like, yeah, maybe I am an anti-theist. I don't take it to be an insult. But I realized, no, I'm not an anti-theist. I believe that theism can be okay. I'm never going to believe in it at this point. I'm never going to believe in your gods, but I don't think that I have to be against theists. But it seems like the Abrahamic faiths are toxic. And I don't care how biased that sounds. I don't care if that pisses off Muslims. I don't care if it pisses off Jews. And, I don't care if it pisses off Christians. I think that there are good things to be found in Islam and Judaism and Christianity, just like I think that there are good things to be found in all religions. I really do. Even though I don't see myself as ever being religious again in my life, I think that there are good things to be found in religion. And I think it's reasonable that people have adopted religion or gravitated toward religion. I don't think you're unreasonable for having religious beliefs. But man, the Abrahamic faiths are so deeply toxic, contradictory, and just bubbling with this type of hatred and or imperialism right under the surface. And sometimes it's not even under the surface. But I think there is this problem that comes from the Abrahamic faiths that stems from the dichotomy you get between this idealized version that people want to have, whether it's Judaism or Christianity or Islam, Muslims, good practicing Muslims, they will tell you that Allah is love and, that there's nothing more loving and wonderful than being a Muslim. And yet that's not true. And Christians will tell you the same thing. And yet that's not true. And Jews, the same thing. The problem is that everything there is so contradictory. If you gave me a set of holy texts that were clearly about love and peace and understanding your neighbor, etc., and yet all the people were doing bad things, I would say that's problematic, but I wouldn't call it contradictory because I would say something's gone wrong here in society. Clearly, we had a good idea that's gotten twisted. But with the Abrahamic faiths, the problem is you look at the texts, and the texts are contradictory. The texts have horrible ideas baked into them. So how can you be surprised that horrible manifestations of those ideas continue to ripple throughout society? Hello Newman says, why talk? Because we were lied to and others are being lied to. Now, even though I've already said in this video that Christianity has good things, religion has good things, it also has a lot of lies. And when you've come out of it, those lies start to stand out so clear. And Rhett, in the original video I was talking about, he uses this relationship analogy. And here is another area where I think a relationship analogy really shines. Because if you've ever been in a bad relationship, and nearly all of us at some point have been in a bad relationship, right? And if you were in that bad relationship for a while and then you got out of it, you could certainly look back and see in retrospect that, man, there was some toxic shit that they said, and there were some lies, and there were some bad ideas. But at the time, you kind of pushed them under the rug. You kind of said, no, it's not a big deal. Like, you tried to make it work because you had this overall idea in the relationship that, no, this is still good. And you were still trying to find any way you could to make sense of that. Of course, once you got out of the relationship, suddenly the lies and the half-truths and the misguidings started to really shine out, like they were glowing in the dark in your memory. And at that point, yeah, you feel like talking to others about it. Connie Madsen says perhaps the most touching comment here in this whole piece. I watch your videos because it helps me feel like I am not alone. Thank you for that. I do think sometimes that if these videos that I make don't change anyone's mind, and I am usually pretty practical in thinking that these aren't going to change very many people's minds. I get that. You're either an atheist or an agnostic when you get here, and you're going to stay one after watching their videos. Or you're a Christian when you get here, and you're still going to be a Christian when you leave, and that's fine. But even if I don't change anyone's minds, I think that there is an incredible value in understanding that some people don't have a network that they can talk to about these things. Maybe it's because you were just a part of a big Christian group in your life. Or maybe it's because you were always in kind of like a rural area where there weren't many people around you anyway. And now that you're an atheist, there are fewer people around you. Maybe you've been ostracized, and it can be difficult, even if you are convinced that there is no God. It can be very difficult to face that truth if everyone around you expects you to toe the line of this Christian hegemony, at least hegemony as it exists here in the United States. So that can be very lonely. I don't think it's possible to underestimate the extent to which loneliness can afflict those who have deconstructed, because depending upon the whole environment or structure that you were a part of before you deconstructed, that could be your entire life. It could be your entire friend base. It could be your entire family. It could be that you're ostracized completely when you decide to step away. Take Jehovah's Witnesses, for example. You know, their processing of what they call defellowshipping people is brutal. It's an absolute ostracization. And for those who have gone through that, for example, man, I feel for you. I think that's a horrible thing to do to anyone, regardless of religious beliefs. So I don't know exactly what scenario Connie Madsen is in, but thank you for that comment. And, you know, if all I do with these videos is make some people feel like they're not as alone, that is gratifying. It would make me very happy. How would you like to be one of my advisors? I'm using Skepticus's memberships as a way to allow you to have a voice in the content and the direction of this channel. I hope to see you in the membership pool, and I want to hear your voice in what Skepticus is doing going forward. Chopped Herring says, Christians, and to a great extent any Abrahamic faithful, who get angry at those who exit their faith are showing how insecure they are about their own faith and how terrified they are of their own house of cards toppling. Their own certainty about their beliefs is so heavily dependent on intervalidation through others that anytime someone leaves, they panic. In Islam, it's especially vivid because apostasy is punishable by death. How weak is your faith if you want to kill anyone who leaves it? This is a wonderful comment. I have always said over and over again that if I were to ever follow a God again, it would be a God who says, try everything. Go ahead. Like a God who challenges you to try other beliefs and faiths and other methods of worship. Because if I am the one true God, if I know that I'm the real deal, then I should know that go ahead, do everything else. You'll come back. I'll still be here. Go ahead. You want to try that other new Christian flavor of the day or new religion of the day? Go ahead. Try it all. I'll still be here. But instead, what we see from religion is the exact opposite, this type of terror that somebody would question these things. And it says so much about the petty nature of their God, a nature which is spelled out writ large in their own holy text. I mean, on multiple occasions, Yahweh says that he is jealous, not as a personality trait, but with a capital J, like it's a title. The God of jealousy. That to me is the saddest, weakest God you could ever have. Imagine working for a CEO who commands you to never question any of his decisions, to never even look at any other job opportunities, to never consider the idea that there might be other companies out there in the world to work for. Is that the kind of CEO who inspires confidence in you? Because it sure as hell is not the kind of CEO that I would ever want to worship. Somerset Sayce says, this is a really interesting topic because as a lifelong atheist, I too, at one time, wonder why there was so much discussion about it. Okay, cool. You escaped. Get on with your life. However, after hearing many deconstruction stories, I get it. First of all, one does not commit half their lives to a worldview, walk away from it, and just carry on like nothing happened. Second of all, what you and others like you do is support for others who are deconstructing. Beyond that, I have been personally horrified by some of these stories. That kind of stuff needs to be exposed. I mean, I wasn't completely naive to indoctrination, but I had no idea the depths it could go to. So those critics can go pound sand and you can keep right on doing what you're doing. Thank you very much. That's a lovely comment. And that's a great point because so much of the commentary here is from those who have deconstructed. And of course, there are people in life who have never been religious for any religion, Christian or otherwise. I get comments like this all the time from people who say, hey, I was raised in it as an atheist and I don't get half of this shit. And quite frankly, I'm envious, dude. Like, that would be really cool. I didn't have a bad upbringing. I don't have horror stories to tell you about my parents or my church. But still, it would have been really cool to not have to wait 40 years to come to these types of conclusions. But yes, I appreciate your comments. It may be a little hard sometimes to realize if you weren't raised in the indoctrination, but the indoctrination does exist. Some people have had it far worse than I have. Some people truly have horror stories to tell. And for them, I think they especially need some of that community that comes from hearing these stories from others. For me personally, I never had those type of horror stories, but there are a lot of gaps in logic that I always just kind of ignored when I was part of the faith, part of the fold. And I wish some people had pointed these things out to me when I was younger. For example, I recently did a video about the whole idea of blood sacrifices and Jesus being a sacrifice. None of it makes any sense. And it's not advanced physics that you have to do to figure out. Like, if you just sit down and think about it for a minute, the logic starts to fall apart. But when you're in the faith, you don't really sit down and think about it even for a minute. Maybe because you don't want to, I guess. Maybe because you're scared. But it would have been nice for me to have these kinds of videos when I was 20 30, it would have been kind of cool. Peach Shoes says, your channel really helps me. I don't have anyone who has deconstructed, and it's tough being around so many Christians. I loved your video the other day when you were talking about so much bloodshed and you were chuckling. It made me laugh so hard. Thank you. So thank you, Peach Shoes, for that comment. I do think that when you point out some of these things, sometimes in my videos, I probably come across as being like aghast because I start thinking about the logic and it makes no sense. But other times I just have to start laughing. Sometimes when I'm reading God-free Bible studies, some of that shit's ridiculous. Sometimes when I'm responding to other videos, that shit is ridiculous. You know, sometimes you hear the things that Christians say and I just start chuckling because I'm like, do you hear the words that are coming out of your mouth? Have you even bothered to line those up with your own holy text? They can be ridiculous. But to your original point, you said, you know, I don't have anyone who's deconstructed and it's tough being around so many Christians. So I do understand that. And in a disconnected, asynchronous way, if this can be some form of community for people, I'm all for it. So thank you very much for your comment. Deridus had a very simple and interesting question. They said, why would anyone dislike these episodes? I mean, the obvious answer is they're an affront to Christians. But on a deeper level, I do understand the question because, you know, when I was a Christian, I didn't care about atheist YouTubers or I didn't care about atheist books. I didn't care about atheists at all. So it is really petty to think that there are people out there disliking these videos. And I'm not saying that like as some high and mighty idea that everything I do is perfect. I mean, if you want to dislike what I'm doing because you don't like the production quality or because you have qualms with some of the facts that I purport to give you in these videos, we can have that conversation, right? But if you just dislike the fact that I or anyone else is doing an atheist video, like how sad of a statement is that about your life, really? Michael Bird says, I'm assaulted at least once a day by someone's religious beliefs, either being directed at me personally or someone in government trying to pass laws based on their beliefs that will impact my life. I don't talk about my lack of faith very often, but I do feel it is necessary to speak against the people out there who seem to think their ridiculous ideas don't impact other people. I will say for me personally, when I step away from this desk, I don't feel like I'm assaulted very often by someone's religious beliefs. As I've already said, I don't talk about this shit when I'm out, you know, having fun with friends or whatever. But part of the reason that I'm not assaulted with these things too is because probably I've cultivated my own space. I don't live where I was raised. I don't live in an environment where I'm around people that I grew up with. So to a large extent, my circle, such that one even exists, is just a circle that's curated of my own volition. So I don't feel assaulted in that way. Now, granted, if I get in and start reading the news on a daily basis about all of the government shit that's happening in this country and in my state on a daily basis, yeah, it can feel pretty assaulting at times to see the barrage of religious crap that has come down the pike, especially in the last year, in the second reign of his orange mighty goodness, POTUS Trump. So that has been not enjoyable, but I appreciate what you're saying here. Jeff Watkins says, we all know why believers harp on non-believers discussing or critiquing their religion. It scares them. And yes, indeed, you and others keep talking because it's good for the community. So thanks as always. So thank you, Jeff Watkins. If I'm being really fair, I mean, of course, I don't think that my channel or my words scare most believers, but for the ones who are in the comments bitching about why I'm doing these videos, yeah, it absolutely scares them. Of course it scares them. So they are just exposing themselves when they comment on videos like this. Michael Bird, we just heard a comment from him a few comments ago, but this is really cool. He says, I sat on the edge of deconstruction / atheism for years until my aunt basically admitted to me that she was atheist, and suddenly I felt free. I wasn't the only one. Hearing it from someone you know can be extremely freeing. I totally understand this. So there are a lot of people who probably are in their heart of hearts atheists, but they can't take that step to admitting it to others or even to themselves because they feel alone, or they feel like, no one else thinks this way. I got to be crazy, or, I'm just going to keep going on to going on. So exposing atheist views is never going to create a flood of new atheists. But I do think that it gives people of doubting minds, atheists, agnostics, whatever flavor they are under, the freedom to say, yeah, I'm not the only one. And others think this shit sounds ridiculous. And if others can do that, I can too. So while I'm not trying to deconvert anyone, I'm not grabbing souls as some kind of prize. I do understand that one of the benefits that can come from a channel like mine is just letting people know that, hey, there are a lot of other people with these ideas and these questions out there, and you're not crazy. Doc Forrest says, I don't go on interactive player games and travel to every social site praising atheism, but I sure do see that with Christianity. Repent and be saved. Turn your heart to Jesus. Jesus is the truth and the way. Save yourself from the fiery torments of hell. This kind of nonsense. When they do, I will naturally speak against it. This is great because I knew this stuff was out there, but I didn't really understand the extent of it until I got a YouTube channel of my own. I've talked about this in other God's Troll Army episodes where I've said, what do you think is the point of this crap? I mean, when I go on Christian content, generally speaking, I don't even put comments below because I get it. It's Christian content for other Christians. And what's going to be the point of me trying to denigrate their view from the comments section? But even if I did, I'm not just going to go into the comments section and start plastering this shit about your God isn't real. Atheism is the truth and the light. What's the point of that? You're going to reach no one. All you're going to do is piss people off. You are just displaying a severe lack of intellect on your own part. And yet there is a certain subclass of Christians who do this over and over and over again on atheist content. But as he points out, it's like on interactive player games, like basically anywhere they can find just to start slapping stupid comments that usually have nothing to do with the original thread. And they're just going to start stuffing their proselytizing in where no one wants it. And quite frankly, I think that they do more to give Christianity a bad name than they ever do to help it. Matt East says, after deconstruction, I too still spoke about God, Jesus, and theology. I think it's because it was my framework for decades. The wound may have healed, but the scar remains. I applaud your efforts with this video. Keep up the good work. So thank you for that. And I think that's a great point because for the first 40 years of my life, Christianity was not the only thing that defined me at all. Even people that are hardcore Christians are more complex than that. And I was always one to question things more. I had other interests. I had other things I was doing. But let's be honest, it's a big part of your life. It is the way that you view spirituality. It's the lens through which you are thinking about the afterlife and heaven and hell and all that and sin and all that. So, of course, it has a major impact on your life. It is, as he says, your framework. So while I didn't have to create a channel that did atheist content, it's probably unrealistic to think that my atheism now would not come through in the videos that I do, regardless of subject, because for 40 years, Christianity was my framework. And now my framework is very different. And that dichotomy, that switch from everything being one way for 40 years to now being so different has to come through in your voice, in the topics that you choose, in the way that you address subjects. I mean, I don't know how it couldn't. Walter says, I was thinking about this the other day. Why do I care if other people I know are still Christians? For me, at least, I finally realized that my attitude toward people who still believe is laced with a little contempt. When I was growing up, I really latched onto the idea that most people stay with a religion for emotional reasons. I suppose I should have more sympathy for people who need religion, but it sort of goes against my basic personality, INTJ. By the way, I have a lot of skepticism about Briggs-Meyer, but I am also INTJ. I really focus on the logical problems of religion, conclude it does not make much sense, and have little patience for those who just accept their religion without giving it much thought. Of course, you can leave your original religion and adopt a live and let live attitude. I guess I'm not quite there yet. So I'm with you, Walter, and not just because I'm also INTJ, but the question of contempt for existing Christians is an interesting one to me. Despite what may come across in these videos that I do, I sincerely do not feel an ongoing sense of contempt for Christians in general. In fact, I have a lot of respect for people who are just trying to do the right thing. They're trying to live their life by what they think are the right, religious values. I do have deep contempt for apologists. There are very few apologists that I don't think are just outright dishonest. Most apologists that I come across, and to be fair, most of them are online, okay? But anyone in real life who would paint themselves as an apologist is basically picking a nice fancy word to say liar. Now, there are a few I've come across online that I don't think fit that mold. Like Gavin Ortland, to me, doesn't come across as a liar because he seems to take this view of apologists or apologetics as defending the faith. Hey, I'm just defending what I believe in. And that's fine. But the problem is that apologists, by definition, start backwards from the conclusion. They already start with this idea that these presuppositions that support our faith are right. And then they try to find everything that they can to make them make sense, which ultimately, in most cases, turns them into liars. Like even with Gavin, okay? And again, I've said I have less problem with Gavin than I have with almost any other apologist that I've seen online. But I think if Gavin is being really honest with himself, there's probably no evidence you could ever give him that would even get him to acknowledge the idea that maybe the bodily resurrection of Christ wasn't a thing. If you gave him a video camera, in a time machine and allowed him to go back to the time of the death of Christ, and he could actually see that the body was thrown in a pit and it rotted for, 100 days or whatever, it was eaten by animals, I still don't think he would allow himself in any way to come out of that experience not believing in the bodily resurrection of Christ. I don't know that. I can't speak for the guy. I've never met him. But this is why I can have contempt for apologists. I also have contempt for literalists like creationists. They're evil. They're outright evil. They are literally lying. And the ones who are, truly in like public view, like Ken Ham and Calvin Smith, they're professional liars. They are truly making a living by lying for their religious ideas. And it's disgusting, and they are undermining the state of humanity. But, for your Aunt May or your Grandma June, who just wants to believe that Jesus was a nice guy and that you should turn the other cheek, and they say the rosary, if they're Catholic, or they're just praying to who they see as the Prince of Peace, and they don't know all of the crap that's in the Old Testament, and they don't know all the contradictions that are in the Bible, and they probably don't care I don't have contempt for them because they're just clinging to this idealized, socialized idea of Jesus and the Bible and salvation, etc. Carolyn Chason says, I hope you do not underestimate your teaching skills. Since I have been watching your videos, I have learned a great deal. When you read Leviticus and made your sometimes funny and sarcastic comments, my mind was open to the true type of creature the Yahweh character truly was and is. Yahweh/Jehovah could do no wrong in the Jehovah's Witness organization. His behavior was never questioned. That is how I was able to free myself from religion, to ask questions. Questions that you continue to answer with competence and wisdom beyond your years. I prefer your style of teaching above others who may have more followers. Keep teaching, please. So thank you sincerely for that, Carolyn. I appreciate that very much. I always feel compelled to throw on this disclaimer, and it's not false humility, but I'm not a biblical scholar. I've never went to school for this. I don't read Hebrew or Greek or Aramaic. I'm not a Dan McClellan or a Bart Ehrman. I mean, I'm not even 1/10 of 1% of those guys. I don't have any training in this. So I always bring that up because I never want to give people the impression that I am presenting myself as such. Nevertheless, I appreciate your comments very much. And I do think that there is a ton of insight to be gained from the Bible that you don't have to have any type of biblical degree for. So I hope that there is value in what I'm bringing when I do things like God-Free Bible Study. I always encourage people who want more scholarly views to research more with people who are scholars, which is not me. But thank you for that. I hope that I'm helping people somewhat. So I appreciate your input. Positivity says, although I was never in the cult, the fact that everybody around me could be quite stressful. I'm a confident person, but having so many people casually threaten me with infinite torture is not the kind of good vibe that helps one integrate into the community. As I got older and looked into it more, I could see the gaslighting clearly, and the stupider the whole belief system seemed. It is comforting to me to see former Christians snap out of it and realize what a hateful trash fire their religion is. It shows that it can be done and that there is hope for everyone. So thank you, Positivity. I really love what I see here as a central point that Christians will not acknowledge generally. And it's this idea that I'm a confident person, but having so many people casually threaten me with infinite torture is not the kind of good vibe that helps one integrate into the community. Christians, the ones that are all in, they generally won't acknowledge this at all, or they couldn't care less. Because in their mind, well, it's not our fault you're going to hell, but you're going to hell. And we're going to tell you you're going to hell until you agree to follow us. They think somehow that they're helping you in doing that. But it is such an aggression. I would like to call it a microaggression, but it's not. Threatening people with hell, even if it's made up, which it is, okay, even if it's not going to happen, threatening people with eternal conscious torment is a form of aggression. And I don't think that this gets addressed nearly enough inside or outside of the Christian community. Even when I was a Christian, I felt very strongly that some people would be going to hell. I also felt very strongly that I was not going to tell them that. Now, I know that the standard Christian view of this is you're supposed to preach to them. You're supposed to try to save them. But that is a nasty form of aggression. And you're not helping someone by trying to save them. You're being an asshole. That's all there is to it. And I know they think they're doing the right thing, and they couldn't be more wrong. Christy Abbey says, I spent most of my life being an avid Christian. So the intersection between religion and the broader culture still interests me. Why wouldn't it? Great point. You don't even have to feel strongly about these things anymore. You don't have to be an avid atheist or an avid Christian, but it's reasonable to see that in this big, wide society where Christianity clearly is a huge influence, especially in the West, and you may have been a Christian for many years, it's perfectly valid to say that just these intersections are interesting to me. They can be interesting on an intellectual level, interesting on a social or political level. I mean, you don't have to even take a side on it. You could be completely agnostic and still be very interested in the intersections of broader culture and Christianity and atheism, et cetera, et cetera. So that alone makes for a perfect case for why one might want to keep talking about Jesus Christ, even if you're an atheist. John A. says, why do we keep talking about it? Because we are still forced to deal with the consequences of the general public who does believe in such things, forcing their beliefs on others, not only through social interactions, but also through political means. Bingo. We feel like we need to keep talking about it because we want for a world where others go through the same deconversions to no longer live their lives and forcing others to, because of ancient stories that don't match up with reality. We talk about it because it still plays a major part in the running of the world. And yes, though people want to deny it, the fighting, wars, etc., that is caused directly because of religious beliefs that are held. Nothing more to add. Amen. Marcellus Robinson says, when you're for Jesus, you can talk about him all day long. And when you're not for him, you can't. Funny how that works. Yes, the perfect double standard. Even for people who aren't religious, usually if you just sit there and talk about Jesus all day, people will at worst just kind of brush it off and say, well, he's a Jesus freak, so he just talks about Jesus all day long. But when you're an atheist and if you deign to actually speak at length about the bullshit of religion, a lot of people get affronted by that. Funny how that double standard works. Wolf A4 says, why still talk about Jesus? Because the human thing to do is to help other people out of harmful situations. That's so fucking beautiful. That is so beautiful. And I've said already, I don't want to sit here and say that all Christianity is harmful. I don't want to be hyperbolic to the point of just burning every damn bridge. But is it harmful a lot? Yeah, it is. And if you have these Christian ideals about helping people, then one way that you can help a lot of people is by noticing that they're in harmful situations and maybe possibly helping them out of them. Now, to be clear, I don't ever try to deconvert someone. I wouldn't even want to attempt that, even if I thought it was possible. But I love this statement. Why still talk about Jesus? Because the human thing to do is to help other people out of harmful situations. Well played, Wolf A4. Ave Satana Ave says, why wouldn't people push back against an often harmful and incredibly widespread set of beliefs that is still used for oppressing people today? I swear, some people have such a narrow view of things. Exactly. So the people that are pushing back are the ones that have just decided for you that religion is good, and if you're pushing back, you're bad. And it's that simple. Pancakes and Bacon says, my story was a bit different. I totally bought into the Christian thing, studied it, read a synopsis of every chapter of every book, mapped out the different dispensations, and tried to decipher every cryptic prophecy. And I did it until I was in my 20s. When I deconstructed, I had all this biblical knowledge and the deconstructed knowledge. Like most new atheists, I just felt I had to share all this learned knowledge. Over the years, it has become a bit of a hobby, and I admit it is fun to trounce on the myths of the believers. But I will make a deal. If the religious get out of our government and stop indoctrinating children, I will quit talking about their stupid religion. Well, that deal will never be consummated. But there is a great point here I want to harp on, which is that, for a lot of people who have deconstructed, a lot of them are the most knowledgeable people about the Bible and Christian ideas that I have ever met, either online or in person. That doesn't mean that every atheist knows more about your religion than you do. It doesn't mean that every religious person is ignorant about their religion, but it is amazing the level to which atheists/agnostics, the level of knowledge that they often have about Christianity. And when you start to acquire all these details, I've told you, I don't desire to get into any kind of verbal sparring with anyone over this crap because it's boring and you're not going to change any minds. But it is hard sometimes. Like, I've literally been in public spaces and heard people talking about the Bible, and I hear someone saying something that is just patently false. Not false because of some scientific belief, but I mean false like the Bible doesn't even back that up. The Bible will show you that that's a wrong idea, and I can actually name now like 10 different places where the Bible will show you that's wrong. And I'll just sit there and bite my lip because it's like, this isn't even worth my time, you know? And even if I did speak up, you know, they're not going to be swayed. They're just going to think, who's this asshole who jumped into the conversation? But sometimes you find yourself with a lot more information about these verses than you even wanted to have. I've mentioned on the channel before that, like, sometimes I will see a verse now and I just know when I see it that it's misquoted. Sometimes I can tell you what the actual verse is and I can tell you what's wrong about it. But other times I see it quoted and I'm like, that ain't right. Like, I don't have the original memorized, but I know that ain't right. And then I'll go look it up and I see, like, yeah, they are completely misquoting this or pulling it out of context. Of course, it's always a Christian doing it. And I'm just like, man, I don't even want to have this level of knowledge, but here I am. Like, what am I going to do with it? I'll start a channel, I guess. Jason Lundberg says, don't sell yourself or other atheist YouTubers short. Every one of these videos has potential to start someone down the path to freedom. I don't sell myself short, Jason. You are absolutely correct. I mean, any single video like this has the potential to start anyone, even the most devout person, going, wait, what? I'm also realistic about probabilities. I am, after all, a high stakes poker player. And I do know that for any given video that I put up, even if it gets many, many thousands of views, the odds that any one view leads someone to suddenly go, whoa, wait a minute, now I'm starting to question everything. The odds are very, 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 very slim, but it can happen. It can absolutely happen. I've seen videos of other people who said that, you know, they were cruising along just fine in their beliefs. And then one day they saw this one video that really started them questioning. And then they started questioning more and more and more and more. And sometimes in a very short period of time, they were suddenly an atheist. So that can happen. I think what's more realistic, or at least more common, is not that you put out one video that starts someone down the path exactly, but instead you put out this one video that they see and it just kind of goes back in the back of their mind, right? And 3 months later, they see another video, or they read an article, or they have a conversation with a friend, you know, and this continues over months and years and maybe even decades until at some point there's this undefined critical mass in the brain that makes someone finally say, I don't know if I believe this shit anymore, you know, and then they start looking things up a little bit and they start going back over their own beliefs or going back over their own Bible or whatever. And then it all starts to cave in on itself. But I don't think that most of those people can usually point to one video or one conversation or one article that they read that made it all collapse. But it's possible. I mean, it is possible. Maybe someday somebody will write me and say, you know, I was a devout Christian and I saw this one video from you and it started me questioning. And if that happens, that's great. I never want to come across as this person, this really arrogant person who says, you know, I'm going to put out this video and I'm going to turn you Christians into atheists. I think that that is an incredibly arrogant and short-sighted way of viewing Christianity and religion in general. Cat Woods says, To this day, decades after I left their religious delusion, the most striking thing about having been a Christian is that I was successfully convinced that the most important relationship in my life was to someone who only existed in my mind. They convinced me to interpret workings of my own mind as messages from an invisible friend or judge, depending upon the situation. If you think about it, that's some next level gaslighting. And it hung in there for years. Of course, people need to talk about that. Thank you, Kat. That is beautifully said. There are a lot of critiques that I can pull against religion and Christianity. And of course, if you watch anything on my channel, you know that I'm doing it all the time. But the idea that you have this relationship with God is one of the most pervasive forms of gaslighting in the entire religious world. And thank you so much for this comment. Unclean Unicorn says, stop trying to force the worship of Darth Vader into the laws of our country, and we will stop making videos against your fictional Dark Lord. I won't talk too much on this other than to say that politics, unfortunately, is one of the things that actually led me to being more of a militant atheist, if you want to consider me that. I cared about politics for most of my life. I didn't really care about the fact that I was an atheist for like the first 10 years that I was an atheist. But politics has really been one of the driving factors that's made me say, okay, enough of this shit. At least I need to put my voice in the ring. And finally, we're going to close with two comments here from Larda. First, it says, I see so many people getting misled and then go on to mislead even more people, and those go on to mislead again. That is why it's important to break the cycle. So many kids get their ability for coherent thought ripped away from them and get that hole filled with religious nonsense. It's truly disgusting to me. Learn about the world, how the world works, and how to behave socially. The most cogent part of this for me is this idea of indoctrination, the fact that kids are brought into this from their earliest time. And you can't stop parents from teaching their kids their culture and their ideals. I mean, that's always going to happen. But this is why I think it's important to at least have someone, some people out there like me and others who at least on some public forums are saying, hey, it's kind of bullshit. You know, like you don't have to think this way. Now, I know that's not going to reach a lot of people because they have been indoctrinated from birth. Most Christians, most religious people were taught their religion almost from the time that they learned how to speak. So it is an insidious force. It really is. Even though the force isn't always evil, okay, it's not always bad, but it is still an insidious force because no one sits there and says, well, I'm going to wait till my kid goes to college and then I'm going to present to him my religious beliefs. And I'm going to ask him if he wants to follow them or if he wants to pick something else. Nobody does that. I mean, I have heard stories of a few parents that did that, but that's really, really, really rare. I mean, that's incredibly rare. Almost everyone indoctrinates their kids from birth to follow exactly what they believe. So of course they follow your beliefs. That is a really nasty aspect of religion that is almost never discussed. So I know we went through a lot of comments here, and maybe I could have cut it down a bit, but I really wanted to highlight what I felt were very positive and uplifting comments. Not just about me, not just about Rhett McLaughlin, not just about atheist YouTubers, but about the fact that sometimes even atheists need a little community. Sometimes we need to know that we're not the only ones that think that this religious stuff is bullshit. Sometimes you need to know that everyone else thinks this is crazy too. You're not going insane. So I really loved the comments on this video. I appreciate every single one of you that I've highlighted today and even the ones that I have not. Thank you so much for your attention on that video and others. I want to give special thanks to my members. As always, you guys are giving me life. You guys are kind of inspiring me to keep cranking out videos as fast as I can. I would say that God could speak at any time and correct me on this, but you know what? There's a comment section. So if he ever wants to chime in, he's always welcome. Until then, I hope to see you and all of your friends and all of your enemies on all of my future videos and all of my past videos. But until I do, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.